You're listening to Chicago Stories, a podcast from City Hall featuring the stories of everyday Chicagoans, as told to Mayor Rahm Emanuel.
This is Rahm Emanuel, Mayor of Chicago. We're here with Bill Kurtis on Chicago Stories. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
How you doing?
Here. I'm doing well, and I think the question should be, how are you doing?
I think it shows.
Well, you're laughing, you're smiling.
Yeah, I feel good.
The pressure's off.
Yeah, the pressure is off. We were just talking a little earlier. The pressure's off because I still have 8 months. I told the office and in the cabinet we're going to get 2.5 years worth of work done.
Good.
In 8 months. You know, the thing, remember the bubble that's ahead of on top of every politician's head?
Sure.
It's now coming out of my mouth.
Every politician should live the last 8 years. Serve them like that, I think. Well, let me get it out of the way. I'm sorry to see you go.
Oh, thank you.
Because you brought a lot to the office. You've done a good job. We're in the biggest building boom, my God, in our history. There's so many things to talk about. And there's a little fear whether there's anybody able to step into your shoes.
You've done a great job within 2 minutes turning the table back to asking me questions. Let's talk about you.
Okay.
So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Did you always know you had a voice? Just like this? That's an incredible voice.
Well, thank you.
Both for TV, radio, for anything.
Well, from age 16.
Really?
I had a hint. Yeah, it does change.
Right.
And I was in a little town in Kansas, Independence, Kansas. There was one radio station in town. So when the other high school kids were going to the drugstore or working out in the hay fields or the oil fields, why, I got a job, part-time job. And from that moment to today, 78, I have used it in some way. And I haven't abused it. I haven't smoked. I did a little sports during high school, but yelled, screamed. I've treated it well, and it's treated me well.
It's incredible, man. That you at 16 you knew.
I knew it. Walter Cronkite was sort of the
North Star, the
Lodestar? North Star. And I didn't think that I could actually have his job, but I kind of wanted to be in they call it the career path, the scope. I went ahead for broadcasting. And so every little job that I would get should have been, and I chose to have it within an experience that could help me later on. Law school. That was to help me later on. Extension.
It's funny because,
college.
Senator Simon once said to me, every year, remake your 5-year plan. Every year, update your 5-year plan and see if it's still the same 5-year plan and what changes or what.
Well, that's why he was such a wise man, that he was.
So I grew up, as did many Chicagoans, with you and Walter Jacobson in the family room. Kind of moved eventually to the kitchen, and then who else? Where? Do you think that same format can work today? And what's changed in broadcast? If it hasn't changed, that's one thing. But if it has, could it work today? And if not, why? And if yes, how?
Walter and I think it could when we get together and talk. Incidentally, we've grown very close like brothers.
Oh, really?
I mean, beyond just working together. Just a real brotherly love for and respect for one another. That aside, I think it could. I think actually we're headed toward something real and substantive. We've become chrome and glass and fancy desk, and the shows, I'm talking about local news shows, are so highly produced with no dead air and great technical abilities that we have squeezed the life out of them. So I would almost, what we did when we came in 73, Bob Wessler, our general manager, Van Sauter, our news director, was to put the newscast in the newsroom. Right in the middle of the writers and the assignment desk behind us. So
that was novel then.
It was novel. And our slogan which we ballyhooed around town on the newspapers that existed then, was it isn't pretty, but it's real. And it caught. It was perfect in being both a branding item and an advertising slogan. I think it could do it because, we're headed to it. We look at our iPhones, which is now the number one source for news. You got it first. And if you want it deeper, it's probably there. So we've got to compete now with that. Newspapers are in such terrible trouble just in being able to make enough money to stay alive. I think the future for them is to combine broadcasting and newspapers. New York Times is doing a great job. And frankly, the Tribune, at least, has come upon a definition of a story, which is to follow the reporter covering the story. It's interesting, and it's illuminating because you see how the kind of the dirty business, if you will. The
sausage, what we would refer on this side, the sausage making.
Yeah, we've discovered that it's interesting to see the sausage made.
It's only fitting for a city that's known for its meat market.
Don't hide it. Don't hide it.
So let me go back. What would you call of a story you narrated? It was like one of those things that is a seminal moment in your career, not because of what it did for your career, but it was either the weirdest, strangest, you couldn't believe what you were, it played out over a couple of days. What were some of those 3-4 top stories that you think defined Chicago, told a story about what was happening either politically, socially, economically, racially?
Well, I covered the conspiracy.
Or if you were teaching a journalism class, here's like this moment that was the most.
I would have to start with the way I got to Chicago, which was I graduated from law school and was studying for the bar. And the guy asked me to fill in for him on the news. And so I went out and I did the 6 o'clock news and had to stick around because we had some high winds. And I had already accepted a job at a law firm in Wichita, Kansas, happened to be in Topeka, and a tornado came through town. I was the guy in the slot on the air and gave the warning, for God's sake, take cover. In 3 months, I was at WBBM in Chicago. So it literally blew me out of town like Wizard of Oz. And never
who's Toto? No.
Never looked back and never got a Toto. And then for 4 years, I guess I would say it was the defining era for me and for Chicago, 66 to 70.
Yeah.
You had the city burning.
Yeah, the convention.
And you had the conspiracy trial, and it filled up that time. A conspiracy trial for a year. I mean, 6 months for the trial. We were the spot everybody was watching all over the country. Every college, tuned in to see if the activists were going to be guilty or innocent.
Take us back. What happened in that conspiracy as you were a reporter? Why did you think it captured?
The characters involved. You had 7. It started with 8. Bobby Seale, Charles Gary was his lawyer out of Oakland. And Bobby had come into town as a Black Panther activist and was giving speeches. That's all he was doing. And Gary told him, I'm trying to sever you from the trial. Every time they mention your name, you stand up in the court and say, I demand my own lawyer. And I'm sick, whether he was or not, out in Oakland. And after about 5 times, why Judge Hoffman said, well, you're trying to disrupt the courtroom. I'm not going to let you. But his only alternative, and being a lawyer, I could see, was to gag him and force him to sit there at his own trial. So the first day when they brought him in, he was tied to a wooden chair and had a gag around his mouth. It looked like Jesse James had taken over the courtroom. And, disruption of a trial, can you imagine?
It had a Kafka-esque
Oh, my God. Everybody was riveted. And, well, he was able to shake his arms like that and make a noise, which was disruptive. Get him out of here. Second day, we're going to try again. And so this time, his face was wrapped with tape. And he was in a metal chair with handcuffs. Well, that's even worse because it's metal on metal. So these big burly U.S. Marshals took him out again. Finally, I think it was the third day, and Hoffman's going to try again. And he comes in, and his entire head is wrapped in a bandage. Only his eyes are looking out. And this time he is tied down so that he can hardly move. Trial begins, and all of a sudden, Bill Kunstler, who is the defense attorney, says, "Oh my God, look at Bobby," and he's slumped like this. His head is down, and said, "He can't breathe." And so they rushed to begin tearing off the bandages, and sure enough, finally, whether he was really, gasping, right? They said, "Get him out of here." So they lift him up, 3 or 4 guys, carry the whole thing out. And that was the end of number 8. And that's how it became the Conspiracy 7 trial. Yeah. And so you have David Dellinger, probably one of the top activists. You have Abby Hoffman, the clown of the movements. You had Tom Hayden, who is the smart guy. You had Rennie Davis, and you had 2 innocent guys thrown in there, Lee Weiner and John Froines, who shouldn't have been there at all. But we threw them all in. And one phrase kind of sums up the conspiracy trial, and it was Kunstler who said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," in his opening arguments, "this is going to be a schoolhouse for the nation on the Vietnam War." Well, that's the last thing Judge Hoffman wanted it to be.
Right, yeah.
And so everything he did, and Tom Foran did, was to prevent this from becoming
a forum
for Vietnam, which was the dominating issue, of course. We had the draft. We had ultimately 58,000 young men and women killed. There was 1 week when there were 500 casualties, dead, shipped out of Vietnam. We forget just how terrible it was. And the whole, atmosphere was there's no tomorrow. It's the end of the world. You talk about a different time.
Yeah.
You thought nothing was going to be the same. But slowly, the hippies grew
receded,
up.
Yeah.
And today they're the staff at the City Hall on 5th floor of the city of Chicago.
Where were you in the '68 convention? And what's the one moment that seared into your mind?
Oh, I've got one.
Okay.
And I don't know that anybody else would have this. The demonstrators, 10,000 of them, had started in Grant Park, and their permit, they didn't have a permit to walk, but somebody said when they canceled the demonstration, Petrillo Banshell said, "Well, let's go to the Hilton. That's where the cameras are, and that's where everybody else. We have to walk down Columbus, and then we can get over." Well, they finally found one where there wasn't National Guard, with the tear gas and loaded weapons. So they got over to Michigan, and then you have 10,000 kids that are walking down Michigan Avenue, and they are stopped at Balbo. So the famous scene, Balbo and Michigan. And it lasted...
And our famous statues.
General Logan. Yeah. It lasted a long time.
The standoff.
Yeah, and first the demonstrators sit down, then they start having their own speeches and songs. And I crawl up on top of a car at the corner, and I can look straight across Michigan, almost with arm's length of the police line. And I remember a single line of police, not 2 and 3 ranks. Rochford was commanding. He was on the other side. And you have a lot of people in the intersection. And then behind us, you have the Hilton and you have the McCarthy kids.
There's a single line of cops, that's it?
Yeah.
And 10,000 kids?
That's what I remember.
Yeah, wow.
That's it. So there's a tension. And I can imagine what's going through their head. And the police, they don't want them to move further south because the the demonstrators want to go to the International Amphitheater, you have to hold the line against everything. And they sat like that and just kind of percolated until it got dark. And we see the blue helmets, in the street lamps. They had been there from late afternoon. So
they're tired.
Yeah, they're tired. I learned a valuable lesson, that truth depends on your perspective. And you better start asking a lot of questions and talk to others from different perspectives to get the real truth. So we're standing there, and I see a surge of the demonstrators push into the police. Now, it came when Hosea Williams, the civil rights activist, was riding a mule-driven wagon of the Poor People's. Everything is an irony.
Isn't that the Poor People's Party?
Yeah, the Poor People's Party.
Yeah.
But they had a permit to parade or what have you. So the police opened up, and the wagon came through. The demonstrators thought, that's a sign that they're going to let us all through. So there was a push to try and follow. And that push led to the command to clear the intersection. What I did not see was about 200 police coming down Balbo.
Coming east?
Coming east.
Yeah.
And so you have the 10,000, you have the reinforcements coming toward them. It's kind of scary, so there was a recoil.
Who knew there was a metaphor for an Italian fascist for the police state right here at Balboa, Michigan? I'm sorry, go ahead.
And Mr. Balbo looking down on it all.
I just had to get
smiling.
that. I had to get that cheap shot in. Go ahead.
He's smiling.
Yeah.
Well, that scares the demonstrators, and they push harder against the police line. So when the command is given, the cops did what they were not trained to do, but had to do anyway. And they charged into the demonstrators. And the rest is history. We've seen it countless times
the black and
on
white
video.
photos, yeah.
Was it a police riot, as Dan Walker termed it? I don't use that term because I think they did what really they had to do. But they were untrained for crowd control.
The police.
Yes. And every police department since then, for 50 years, has been trained in the proper way to handle a crowd, which is hold your ground, move forward slowly.
Slowly, yeah.
These guys, it was like a football game, and it's the kickoff, and they're going in. Batons raised above the head, and
swinging.
Yeah. Now, the important thing is that there were no live television cameras there. There were studio cameras, but everybody thinks, oh, it was on TV. But it was recorded on television because Mayor Daley had cleared the streets both for a taxi strike and also because he didn't want the hotels to be covered like, the amphitheater would have been covered outside. So we recorded it on big, thick 2-inch videotapes, put the tape onto a courier who was dressed like a cop, who heads for the amphitheater, and without any pre-screening goes into the video tape room, and the director calls to Cronkite, and presumably to the others, and said, look, we just got some tape in, all hell is breaking loose at Balboa in Michigan. We're just going to roll it, and why don't you just narrate to it? And up comes what looks like, again, the end of the world. And Cronkite, loses it. And it looks like all hell is breaking loose. You're right. And so that was it, and we have lived with that and are still living with that moment.
Do you think journalism is a better journalism post-Vietnam and Watergate?
Well, investigative reporting was the star of Watergate because you have two journalists who brought down a president. And that phrase, is kind of tattooed on the forehead of everybody who comes brought down a president. So I have noticed that almost every president has to kind of face that. If there's a niche in the armor, or a scandal, they will run real hard at trying to expand that and find the root. I believe that the kids today are good. I think they're better trained than we were. They had the benefit of experience of these things. God knows we have 24-hour broadcast networks. So it usually comes down to a balance. Yeah, we make mistakes like everything else, but we also do quality work. Yeah.
So this is an open-ended question and it's not really fair to you. You come here in '66. Obviously, '66 to '70 is pretty. Almost the whole, or as to quote Todd Gitlin, the whole world's watching, and it seemed to be centered on Chicago. What has changed to the better for the city? What has changed to the worse? And what would you say Chicago today and going forward could learn from what happened to the '60s, to the time you've been covering it?
For the better, we're in the most explosive building boom in our history. It's unbelievable. You have a Millennium Park that has kind of created a whole new city within a city around the park. You have the Riverwalk now. That is one of my favorite things. So we've developed the river. Can you imagine that opportunity? The schools have a lot of good things that are happening there. We have two big problems that are hanging around our neck. Who am I talking to? One is violence, and the other these pensions. The violence, there just seems to be no answer to it. We kind of know what should be done, but it's very difficult against the tide of the river of guns that can flow so easily in here. So what has to change? And I guess the mistake was we tore down Robert Taylor Homes, Cabrini Green, without adequately thinking, where are these people going to live, and especially the kids. And for a while, it seemed, hey, that's great. We don't hear anything. And then we have no structure. It takes a village to raise a child. What if you don't have a village? You don't have the teachers because the kids are kicked out of school. You don't have coaches because there's no school. You don't have the black pastors in the churches because they don't go there. You have the only jobs, drugs, and then the only place the kids can go, and they're recruited right into gangs. And the gangs are different, I think.
Totally.
Now we have, 10-year, 11, 12-year-olds who have to perform the initiation. And I think I was in the Marines, and I remember they said, now, be very careful because more Marines are killed by accident, playing with a .45 than they are in combat. And so I immediately had a respect and a fear of this. Now, these kids have .45s and the latest, and you can't have a gun without firing it. Well, they don't have any ranges, so they'll just go fire anywhere, anytime. So there's this whole culture that, has been created that is very, very difficult. And that's why I hate to see you leave.
Wow. I actually think there are three moments that are separate but together create a combination that's been toxic. One is taking down the public housing, which should have been taken down, but without the support, everybody got spread out. The containing didn't work, but the spreading out without support for transition, big mistake. Number two was the top of the gangs were eliminated. Now you have not one gang fighting another, but internal conflict within the gangs for control, for real estate and markets, and et cetera. And third, which doesn't get discussed, which is if you have all these people leaving Robert Taylor and going into a Cottage Grove and established Pill Hills, other South Shore established neighborhoods, and then, we've downsized city government, and we're 8,000 people less. Those are good-paying jobs with middle-class, not only incomes but values, and you eliminate that from a Cottage Grove or a South Shore or any other part of the city, and you have people coming out of public housing without any support. You have a very unstable situation. Yeah. And those three events, while they make sense individually, collectively have led to something. It's just a piece of it. It's not everything, but there's other pieces to it.
Usually big mistakes come when there's a combination of things suddenly that come together at just the right time, the perfect storm. And you're absolutely right. You can't solve it by just solving one of those. You have to
take them all.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, if you were teaching a class on journalism, A, would you recommend people still go into journalism? And B, what would be your caution and your advice?
10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I would say no.
You would have said no.
Yeah. But now I've changed. And the reason...
You're telling me that you think there's a renaissance coming back into serious journalism, not entertainment, is what I'm walking away from.
Yes, absolutely. Not in the form of dissemination of information that we once knew. I'm afraid, the price of pulp has gone up 30%. So they better
That's our trade war with Canada.
That's right. They better get into the online. But I do see, news isn't going to go away. The demand is still there. It's the supply that is changing. And now, first of all, the kids are better trained. They need the experience. And I think, look, if you don't have that reporter who is assigned to City Hall, who is here on a beat every time, you move down the list of journalistic jobs. And there are networks broadcasting internal communication within hospitals, within corporations. Those are videos, and those are journalism jobs. So the whole spectrum is there, but you better know how to write, because that'll make you a star. And well, the Field Museum is a very good spot. They had a young woman come in, started doing her own pieces within the in the museum, and then they spread to other museums, creating their own networks. I was very pleased to see that. So I would say, sure, you can go into it. May not even call it journalism anymore. Communications, convergence.
Do you think, Bill, is in the newsrooms, both the big TV, the print, et cetera, but now spreading, do you think City Hall still plays a dominant role?
We're a mayor-centric government here. You will always be news. So it does.
I have a theory that you guys have a love-hate relationship with the fifth floor.
Oh, I'm sure. I think that's right.
Without it, you would be aimless. With it, it brings a photo, and then you...
And it's because we have skepticism built in. That may not always have been here, but that's what we look for.
How do you ensure that your skepticism and your criticism doesn't flip over to cynicism? And just being, I'm supposed to question you, that's one thing, but I'm not, it's always in a dark light, it's always in a nefarious. How do you caution a young student to not become a cynic before it's time?
Here's a good opportunity for you.
Okay.
Become a teacher and explain why you feel that story is unfair. One, if you want to strike fear into a journalist, just say these words: you're wrong, you're inaccurate, I'm sorry, and here's why. That'll kill them. So lay it out and show them. And then you're taking that time to give them a little...
Can it be laced with profanity, or do I have to clean that up?
It's even better. And take time with them.
Yeah. All right, we're going to do a rapid round. Ready?
Uh-oh.
Oh, you got this. If you don't have this, Bill, then we're in trouble. We're with Bill Kurtis. Ready? Chicago River or the Chicago Lake?
The river now.
Okay.
Used to be the lake.
Yeah.
River now.
Okay. Cubs or Sox?
Cubs.
Okay.
North side.
Thick or thin pizza?
Thin. You know why?
Oh, my God.
Thick.
Topeka.
Yeah, you're going to chew that cheese, for about 15 minutes before you can get it down.
All right. Sears or Hancock?
Sears.
Why?
Tallest, biggest. One of the Adrian Smith, I think, played with that. He has now done the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, tallest building in the world. Skidmore Owings.
12-inch or 16-inch softball?
I haven't played either one.
Really?
But I'd choose 16, I think, because it's easier for me to hit.
We're with Bill Kurtis. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Mr. Mayor.
On Chicago Stories. I'm going to repeat my lines again. I'm supposed to tell the journalists in the other room. You got it wrong. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. Or you're inaccurate, and here's why. And here's one other thing. You can say, well, I was wrong. I guess I won't. I'll retract my pulling
I
out.
think, well, you know what? Let's go up to Medill and political science. You and I will do a class together.
Good.
I'm in. All right. Bill Kurtis at Chicago Stories.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Chicago Stories with Mayor Rahm Emanuel. You can subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tweet your guest ideas using hashtag ShyStories. Thanks for listening.